Hi friends, today we are diving in to Adobe Premiere Pro for a full breakdown of how to edit a video from start to finish in 8 core stages, the ABCs if you will. I'll walk you through my workflow, how I move through these 8 stages, as well as my creative process from start to finish. Now to do this, we'll be going over this short film I produced as an editing exercise for y'all to follow along with. I took some old footage that I had shot of the Vegetarian Festival in Phuket, Thailand back in 2021, and some footage that I had of my friend Simone dancing near Joshua Tree, and basically tried to merge those together underneath some sort of voiceover. I've always loved the poem Invictus, and Tom O'Bedlin's recorded readings are just phenomenal. There's a whole YouTube channel of his audio that I actually sourced for this project. And then to balance it out, I asked my friend Anne to do her own reading of the poem as well. The challenge was to take 3 completely unrelated elements and practice weaving them together into a singular piece that felt cohesive, essentially crafting a video from scratch in the edit. And here's a teaser of the final piece.
Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul.
I'll go ahead and mention here up top, if you want access to these same exercise files, including my personal project files, then you'll be able to find all that in my learning community. That said, if I have done my job well here, you will still get an immense amount of value from just this video. So here we go. Okay. There is a lot that goes into this stage. It is in fact so crucial that yes, I am going to spend a fair bit of time breaking this down. So what's the first thing that we do? Questions. Always lead with questions, always seek better questions. To start, what are we editing? Where is it going? Who is it for? And why are we making it at all? When you add up these responses to these questions, you'll find yourself much, much closer to knowing how you will approach your edit. And finally, a bonus question that I cannot stress enough how helpful it is. What is one thing I can focus on improving for myself in this piece? It can be a skill, a technique, something new I've wanted to try out, whatever it is. I want at least one thing I can look back on this project and be able to tell if I improved or not. Asking myself this question before I start a project is a discipline in itself, and I don't always do it. But when I do, it does pay huge dividends. For this one, I wanted to practice simplifying my edit, not giving in to the temptation to include some part of every asset I have at my disposal. Y'all will see in a bit, there's quite a bit more footage than what I included in my final cut. So for me, the focus here was practicing clarity of what ultimately fits into the story I'm trying to tell. And if you're thinking, Anthony, I thought you said you've been editing for 15 years. Isn't that pretty basic? Yeah. The basics are what you keep practicing to keep yourself sharp and to keep getting better. So we receive all our assets from the client. It's time to start prepping the project. How do we start? Well, your very first step should already be done for you. What do I mean by that? I mean that you don't want to be starting a new project completely from scratch. You want to give yourself a major leg up and start from a project template. If you haven't already, you can check out my previous video where I break down my own project template that I use for virtually everything, and it's available for free by signing up for my newsletter, or it's also available in my learning community if you want to check that out. You can also just create one from scratch for yourself. So, into Premiere Pro we go. All right, so we're getting inside of Adobe Premiere Pro now, and we've opened up our project template, and the first thing that we want to do is actually import our media. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Hopefully you already have your media organized properly within your project folder tree so that when it comes to importing inside of Premiere, it's a very simple. The next part of your project prep is actually logging all of your footage and going in through the metadata. Now, metadata is essentially any information that is attached to the digital file that you have. When you get inside of your project window, you're going to have this nice sidebar where you're going to be able to scroll through all the different metadata columns that are available to you. One quick tip I'll say about metadata, 2 columns that I always make sure are present and are not on by default, which I find very strange, is video usage and audio usage. Those columns are going to basically point out the number of instances that specific audio file or video file are referenced within any timeline inside of your project, and they are so useful. I highly recommend going inside of your metadata display and making sure that those 2 columns are visible. The rest of it is kind of dealer's choice, but just personal tip, that's what I recommend. Because we don't have any production notes, no script notes, no anything, the onus is on us, the editors, to sort it out and basically kind of make a mental map of what this footage is, something that is useful to you that you can actually go back and reference and know what you're looking at. The point of the metadata, think of it like adding keywords. You want to add information that you want to be able to search for later. My primary way of sorting through footage is based around a methodology called tape-to-tape editing, and that's where I basically lay everything into a timeline, and then I'll lift and sort and mark things there. But in order to first figure out what string out timelines I want to create, I first go through everything and I label all the different scenes. Make sense? Cool. So you have all of your footage now labeled a certain way based on a scene or description or something like that. You have a general idea of what all your footage is. The next step is to put it all into string out sequences. General rule of thumb is that it's a really good idea to just make your string out sequences the same settings as what your final deliverable sequence is going to be, if you happen to know what that is. Then it just simplifies your process because you can take your string outs and duplicate them into your select sequences, which you can duplicate into your assembly sequences, until you're actually just working on your main timeline. That's how I like to do it anyway, and that's just an example of how knowing where you're going and thinking ahead is going to be very, very useful. Now, what's interesting in this project, a little bit of a curveball that I've thrown for myself, a lot of the footage is in different frame rates. It was shot on a Blackmagic 6K Pro, so the way that that camera deals with the mixed frame rate is that it actually is going to pull it into Premiere in its slow-mo form. The strategy that I used for this was I basically duplicated my string out sequences that were heavy with a lot of slow-mo footage, and I had one where the slow-mo was all basically as is so that I could see that, but then I made another string out sequence that I called 24p conform, and in that string out was where I basically did the math and sped up the clips. So then I could watch those clips and get my ideas of what selects I wanted to pull. So here we have finally a prepped project. This next phase is called watching. We are going to watch all the footage. And if you're thinking, Anthony, I thought we were going to be making our selects and all that. Yeah, you are, but not quite yet. I like to pull selects in 2 passes, okay? So what I'll do is I'll duplicate my string out sequence. The reason I keep my string out sequences separate and untouched is because for me, that is where the raw footage lives. If I want to start making notes or setting markers, then I'll duplicate that sequence and call it my selects V1. One of the things that you want to keep in mind is having what I call a non-destructive principle. The idea is to always preserve a layer of work and then duplicate it and move on to the next thing, and then preserve that layer and duplicate it and move on to the next thing. Point of this first pass, though, is really just to watch the footage. Hopefully you're watching it with an open mind. You're basically looking to listen to the footage, literally listen, but also visually listen. Be present with the footage and be present with yourself. This is a very crucial step because this is where you first start getting ideas about what the footage is. You're just logging everything in your memory, right? Now, in terms of how you actually mark footage, for most projects, especially kind of smaller ones like this, I rely on a combo of basically lifting selects to different video tracks and then setting markers. I'll mostly just set markers in the first pass where I'm watching things, because then I can make notes in the markers in the comment section to identify certain things that I'm noticing, or, ooh, I'm getting an idea for this. In general, think of it as trying to give yourself a visual map of the footage. I color code my markers, and again, I do it based on patterns and things that I'm picking up in my first watch through of everything. That's why the first watch through is really just such a crucial ingesting. Your machine is ingesting the footage and you are bodily ingesting the footage. That's a pretty accurate way to think about it. All right, stage 3, selecting. The next stage that I do is I basically duplicate my selects V1 timeline, make it a V2. Everything on video track 1, I ripple delete, make sure that your audio and video are still linked, and you can shrink all that together. Now you have a much shorter timeline of just stuff that you want to take another pass at, and here's where you start actually making your selects. You go through your V2 timeline and you start lifting things again, but now you're getting much more discerning about, okay, now I've actually watched all the footage, I know everything that's there, and actually now the final video, the thing that I'm going to create, is starting to materialize in my mind, right? By the way, you can do this process as many times as you want. That's kind of the beauty of it. It's just a nice way of being able to visually identify all the parts of your footage that are first usable, then that are good, then that are really good. Like you most likely want to be pulling from the really good clips. And then let's say that you don't find the thing that you really want in that top selection, you just work your way down. It's great. I love it. You can take this workflow and make it work for almost anything that you edit. Again, there are other ways of doing this. For certain projects, this one might not be the most efficient or the best way, but when in doubt, I always revert to this. Like if I'm going into a project completely cold, this is the method that I use to get a handle on the process. From here, once I have everything now sorted, one extra layer of visually identifying your footage is to then go in and color code everything. So you can color certain clips for certain scenes, because then once you're pulling from your select sequences into your main timeline and you're editing, you can very easily get a visual representation of your cut. So color coding your clips, great idea. Nice. You've got all of your selects done. The very next thing that you're going to do before you enter the assembly phase is you're gonna leave your desk, you're gonna go walk outside, you're gonna touch some grass, you're gonna take in some sunshine. Trust me, go do this. Go take a long walk and let all of the media and visuals and audio and everything that you've just ingested into your body, let it sit for a bit, let it digest. And while you're on your walk, getting some motion in the ocean, motion in the ocean, I don't know. While you're on your walk and you're getting some motion in your body, one of the things that's really great to be able to do with that is to start building the edit in your head. Start making the connections. Unless, truly walking is just not for you, I totally get it, but find some other way to move. Hop on the Peloton if you've got that kind of thing going on. I don't. Then, once you've done that, we have the selects. We have all of our ingredients, shall we say, on the table, prepped, chopped, in cute little bowls, ready to go. It's time to cook, ladies and gentlemen. Stage 4, assembly. This is where we actually get into a timeline and start putting everything together. For this project specifically, I opted to start with what's called a radio edit. Because it is only a 60-second spot, I know that the most driving force of this video is going to be the audio. So sometimes a very helpful way to think about editing or building your video is that you're kind of like building a body. Coming up with a radio edit, that first assembly, you're really just trying to get a skeleton in place. You just want some sort of infrastructure that you can hang the rest of your project onto. Give yourself something that you can bounce off of. That's what we're doing here with the radio edit. I found a free pack of soundscapes from this wonderful composer named Stephen Keach. He's got a free download of 10 soundscapes. I just decided to take that pack and find one that I really liked that I thought could fit. The reason that I like soundscapes like this for a project like this, as opposed to more driving, forceful music, I knew that the sound design itself would tend to be very dynamic and loud. And then there's the poem underneath.
Out of the night that covers me.
So I knew that for music, it didn't have to be much. I could really just have sort of this ambience underneath that would fill out the gaps in between the more dynamic sound design that I was envisioning for this thing.
Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade.
Personally, I opted to spend some time here dialing in the audio mix a little bit, just so that I would have a more accurate feel for how the visuals were matching with the audio that I was setting up. Now, the beauty of a radio edit, especially for a project this short, is that once you have it kind of dialed in, you really feel like you've already edited a video, even though you have no visuals. You have more than a skeleton of what you're going to create, and it's very exciting. So once you have that, do yourself a favor, take another little quick break, just like revel in it a little bit. Think of someone that you really admire, someone that you really respect, and tell them. Just go ahead and tell them right now. Do it. Just do it right now. Then, once you've done that, it's time to move on to the next phase of your assembly. You've probably heard the phrase, great writing is rewriting. Or great writing is great editing. In the year 2000, Sean Connery stars in a film called Finding Forrester. And this movie kind of changed my life a little bit. There's a very, very specific scene, and if you've seen the movie, then you know it well. Jamal Wallace is visiting the reclusive writer, played by Sean Connery, in his apartment.
Sit.
He just loads up a paper and just starts typing without even really thinking about what he's doing. He's just typing, and Jamal's like, what are you doing?
I'm writing, like you'll be, when you start punching those keys.
It's also like beautifully edited. So much about that film was kind of influential on me in ways that I still probably haven't fully unpacked.
You write your first draft with your heart, and you rewrite with your head.
He's typing away, and he has this great line. He says, the key to writing is just
To write, not to think.
Probably have a terrible Sean Connery imitation. And then later on in the scene, Jamal has been there all day, and you see him still sitting there in front of the typewriter. And now it's dark out, so he's just been sitting there. He hasn't written anything. And then just from the bowels of the apartment, somewhere else in another room, you hear Sean Connery's booming voice go,
Punch the keys, for God's sake!
more times than you might think, I find myself in front of my computer on an edit, and I just hear Sean Connery's voice boom at me.
Punch the keys!
It's great. I love it. It's terrifying. I don't have a good, fun, quippy way to reword this, but the key to editing is just to edit, meaning that you need something to edit. You need to get something in the timeline that you can start manipulating. And this, my friends, is where, on some level, speed is the name of the game. So what that meant for me, I went through my select sequences. This is where they come in handy. I highlighted all the select sequences for the sections that I was thinking that I really wanted to start implementing. And then I just start copy pasting stuff into my timeline. So for me, in this initial setup, what I was paying attention to was all the footage at the temple that I thought was kind of intriguing. Then there was all the footage at the street parade with all the fireworks and everything, and that felt like a very key piece. And then Simone had two separate sections, one where she had a red shirt and the emotions were a bit more intense and the dancing was a bit more out there. And then the blue shirt, which had a different feel and tone to it as well. So I really didn't know how each one was going to play. But the point was, getting some selects into the timeline, you just start to get ideas from the combination of things. The next stage I call composing, okay? Now, you might be wondering, where are we at with is this a V1, is this a V2, or what's the difference between the assembly and the V1? What that stuff actually means is very dependent on the nature of the project itself. Now, in some circumstances, your assembly might be your V1. Generally though, your assembly is going to be more like your vomit draft. It's just going to be getting things on the page, as we say, or getting things in the timeline. And that part is very important, that's great. But a V1 is kind of your first honest attempt at a full cut of your video, so that if you show it to a client, you show it to a friend, it should give them a work in progress approximation of where you're going. And how do you get there? You move into the stage that I call composing, which is essentially where you are starting to really compose the video. You're starting to arrange it into a particular structure that feels cohesive. This is the main exploration phase of your edit. This is where you're really trying to just see what works, what you like, what connects together and what doesn't. In my composition phase for this project specifically, interesting things came up. I realized that there were too many threads that I was trying to weave together. And remember what I said one of my main goals was to simplify my edit. There was just a lot of compelling footage, and I was like, well, maybe these ideas can work together in a certain way. And maybe they can, but having a personal intention for what I wanted to focus on in this edit specifically helped me immensely as I moved through it, because then it affected the questions that I was asking and the notes that I was taking. And so one of the things I realized was I didn't need any of the temple footage, just the whole temple scene. It's compelling footage, but it didn't really fit with the overall dynamic of what I was trying to do. So away it went. And I got closer then to the video that I felt was trying to come through me, if that makes sense. All right, friends, you now have a V1. You have an actual cut of your video. This is an amazing feeling. You should feel great about it. And the one thing that you should do immediately to reward yourself, step away from your desk. If it's at nighttime, go sleep. Just go sleep. Let it all marinate, okay? You need to take a little bit of time. You need a bit of a breather. You need some space. What's gonna happen in the space that you give yourself, however much you can afford, is that essentially now the video is going to sort of germinate. It's going to start to sprout the thing that it actually will become. It's amazing. Every time I finish a V1, I leave it for a little bit, even if it's just for like a few hours, if that's what the day is like. But as soon as I come back and I watch it through again, I watch what I just did, it's amazing how different it looks and feels and how things just jump out. You're like, why did I do, what is that? Why is that there? And then you just start making notes. This is how you move into the next stage, which is refining. I just set a marker. I'll watch it through and I'll just set a marker in the timeline for each shot or each cut that just feels kind of off. If I know why, then I'll make a note in that marker right then and there. But in general, I try to like just watch it through, leave all the markers, and then I'll go through again and then like leave notes on those markers. Those become the tasks for the day. Those become the problem points that I'm trying to solve. Depending on how long your project is, this iteration process can be as long or as short as you have, frankly. You can go all the way to version 47, or you can just only go to version 2. But you're now in that flow, you're in that refining process where each change that you make affects everything before it and it affects everything after it. And then you're just doing this calibration and balancing dance. It's very fun, and I really, really love it. This is where some of the good stuff happens, right? In this particular section, what I realized was that the red shirt scenes with Simone, for me, felt like they were messing things up. I realized that actually there was enough in just the blue shirt scenes with Simone. Again, just thinking about simplifying my edit. This shot, man, it's not a bad shot, but it's such a strong emotion that she's having here. And because we've just been introduced to her, this cut and this cut, they match visually actually pretty well. Like the camera movement is bringing us into this flow, but story and emotion. This is a rule of 6 example here. We don't know why she's looking this way. We don't know why she's having this reaction. And based on how we just were introduced to her, it just doesn't quite follow. So once you're in that juicy swirl of the refining process and you finally come to a point, generally it's because a deadline arrives, the cut is now in a good position. It's in a good spot to be locked. Now a locked cut, it's kind of a romantic idea in post-production. The longer you are with a project, the more ideas you will have about how to change it. So whatever you can offer yourself in terms of boundaries and hard deadlines, whatever you need to just get to the finishing point, don't shy away from those like I do. Lean into them and really trust them and try to meet them, because otherwise these things can just go on forever. Now, quick thing, before you move into the next stage, which is finishing, the one thing that I would highly, highly recommend you do, get some feedback. This can be really anything, but you want to take your cut that you feel pretty good about and you need some other eyeballs on it, okay? Bring a friend over, show someone what you've done with little to no disclaimer, okay? Don't do the thing where, you know, this is a work in progress, I'm still working on this, I'm still working on, none of that. Don't do any of that. Don't give your friend or whoever's watching your thing any more information or context than your audience will get when they see it for the first time. So in the refining process, you're aiming to find that sweet spot where the cut just feels good, right? It feels right. And then once you have that, you get to move into the finishing stage. Now, what's in the finishing stage? It's everything that you would think of. It's where you're adding that nice polish to the video. For this particular process, for me, I relied heavily on the sound design and the color grade to really elevate the piece and make it feel like something substantial. I will do a more in-depth breakdown of the sound design for sure, because that really is a more intense workflow. Once you are in the finishing process and you have your sound design dialed in, your color grade dialed in, now you're really looking at the elusive 8th stage, which is what we call the final cut. It is a stage because, frankly, just all kinds of weird things can start happening once you try to actually lock the thing. If you have to like conform the project and move it over to a different software to finish the sound or finish the color, which I finished this in DaVinci Resolve for the color grading, it can be quite simple as just exporting out of Premiere Pro. Good, you're done, final cut. rock and roll. But sometimes you have these more in-depth processes. So Final Cut, just because of all that, kind of deserves its own stage. The other thing that the Final Cut stage has, which is very, 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 very important. Feedback. I cannot stress this enough. Find a way to implement feedback into your editing process, because trust me, you might think based on the number of hundreds of times that you have watched your video that you have seen everything and that you know all the things about it. You don't. That's the crazy, beautiful part of editing. You do not see everything, ever. You need other humans, you need other perspectives. Literally, just bring a friend over or export out a version, ship it to another friend, or you can hop into a learning community like mine and you can send out versions of your cuts there and get feedback. I guarantee you one of the things that will improve your editing faster than anything is getting other eyeballs on it. It's all about perspective, and all you really have is your own. So knowing how to take responsibility for that, great. Knowing how to share and collaborate with other perspectives to create something that actually transcends just you, that is where your editing and your video making really takes off. All right, friends, those are the 8 core stages of an edit from start to finish, as I am conscious of them. Hopefully you found this helpful. Hopefully you found a little more value out of it than you were anticipating, because that's the goal. And if that is the case, my friends, then do the thing. By all means, continue to let me know what you'd like to see more of from me. I'm hoping to do more things like this if you find it helpful, because I am still so young in my YouTube journey. And so I'd really love to know what y'all would like to hear from me. But other than that, much love, friends. Until next time.